fires that gun. The top turret, the radio operator fires those guns, and there's a waist gun on each side back here. The two waist gunners fly those, and there's the ball turret gunner underneath here, where you have to be under, you can't be over a certain size to be a ball turret gunner, because you're clamped in there, the little wall underneath the plane. And then the tail gunner's back here. And I'll tell you a story about, a little later, about in the Second World War, about two people that, from my hometown, that I knew personally, and the youngest one of them, the brother of one of these, of this man, their plane got shot down on one of their missions, and on about the 12th of mission, and the other kid from St. John's, it was a ball turret gunner, his plane was shot down on the 15th mission. So they were prisoners of war during the Second World War, and one of them was in a terrible prison camp in Dachau, actually in Poland, and the other one was in a prison camp. My wife and I got to visit those two camps, and when we were over in Europe last year. And it's awful to see the pictures of those people, how emaciated they were and how bad they looked. They didn't get a lot to eat, and they just were not treated very well. When the Russians started pushing toward the other Allied lines, because they were on the Allied side, they started moving those captured prisoners to different prison camps, and finally they just thought, well, if we're going to get out of this life, we got to get out of this prison camp. And so I don't know if any of you have this here, but it's not important whether you are or not. But if you are, a man by the name of Grant. He's this guy that was a ball turret gunner. Was named Lyle Grant, the great grandson of Heber J. Grant, who was the president of the Mormon Church for a while. And so he was shot down. He was the one that shot down. And so they started moving him. So he told his friend, his name was Wazowski. He said, "We got to get out of this prison camp." So they finally figured out a way to escape from the prison camp. And then during the day they would hide. They'd dig into in a barn, or they'd dig into a haystack or something and sleep all day long. And then at night they'd get up and move toward the American lines and try to work their way back to the American lines, and they finally made it. But the other guy from my hometown, he didn't make it. He wrote a wonderful book about his experience called From Heaven. One of his book was Until I Return in Spring, and Grant's book was From Hell to Heaven, From Heaven to Hell. And I have both of their books. I should have brought them with me, but you'd be interested in looking at them. And so but can you imagine? And one reason why I ask you to speak up is because if you're flying this plane, you're sitting right up here, and you have earphones on, but when all of those guns, even in our training missions, all those, they'll drag a sleeve through the formation, and we shoot at the sleeve, or the gunners do. And so, can you imagine the noise in one of those planes when all those guns are firing? And I just showed you how many guns, and they're big, powerful machine guns. And so as a result, I've lost part of my inner ear. So if I ask you to speak up, why, please do, because it's hard for me to understand what you're saying. And, but I survived. That's the important thing. And I didn't fly any, I flew 2 combat missions, never any opposition. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm something that I wasn't. And the missions that I flew were to cities that had been heavily bombed, and this was just some more bombs. And there's one story connected that one of these crews that had been bombing up in Germany, when they came back to their plane, they had to bail out of their plane. And when they bailed out, the local, you see, Mussolini was the head of Italy at that time, and Hitler was the head of Germany. And so these Italian people, when these Americans bailed out of their plane, they picked them up and took them to the town square and hung them all in the town square. The people of this little town of Foggia, where I was later stationed, flying these planes out of there. That happened earlier. And so they, it's quite a story. So the Americans then kind of hated this town because they knew what happened. They found out what happened. And so they had a rule that they never should have had, but they did. They would go on a bombing mission up over northern Italy, and the motto was, save a bomb for Foggia, this town. It wasn't a military town or no military objection, but they saved a bomb and flattened this town, Foggia, Italy. But think of all the innocent people that got killed. Just had nothing to do with the Americans, but some of them did. So they saved the bomb and bombed Foggia, Italy, and that's where I was stationed then during the Second World War. And by the time I got there, the war was about over. And so they took me out of this plane and started me, you can pass that around if you want to, and they started training me in this P-51. It's called a P-51 Mustang. I think it's probably the greatest plane ever made. It's the most maneuverable plane, and about as fast as any other, about as fast but a lot more maneuverable than about any other fighter plane. And so I learned to fly that thinking that they were going to send me to the Pacific theater where the war was still on, but it never happened, so I stayed in Italy the whole time. But there were a lot of people from Italy that, from my hometown that went through Italy. A group of young men that I know personally landed at the Anzio beachhead just above Naples, Italy. They landed there and then they fought themselves all the way up through Italy, clear up into the Alps. My next door neighbor was brother to one of those people fighting in the infantry, fighting up through there. When they got, and his older brother, was a P-47 pilot, and he got shot down behind enemy lines. And so in the process of getting shot down, his friends followed him down in the plane and saw his parachute open, and they saw him float to the ground and get up afterwards and hide his parachute and walk away. So they knew he was still alive when he was shot down. And but here his brother was fighting with my cousin Eldon Pulsifer and another guy, and they were fighting their way up through Italy. And one of them got killed, one that I used to work for, he was killed. But Gleason, this guy that got shot down's brother, was in the infantry and my first cousin. And they got up through, and they were up in the edge of the Alps. And Gleason, this guy, he sat down and took off his boots because he'd been tired of walking all day, hiking with the pack, and took his boots off and had his feet in a stream. Somebody came up behind him and put his arms around his, hands around his eyes like that from behind. And of course it scared him to death, but when he jerked the hands away and reached for his rifle, he turned around and it was his brother. Now, if there ever was a believe it or not story, that's it. Can you imagine, one in the Air Force, one in the Army, he fights up there, and the first and the underground helped the pilot find his way back to the American lines. And the first person he saw was his brother. That's incredible. And they both survived and came home, but this friend was named Lincoln, and he was a good friend of mine. They sent him home because the underground had helped him, and they didn't want the word to get out that who helped him. And so then he came home, and I was in training at the time at San Antonio, and he came by to see me on the way back to South Carolina. And 3 days later, I got a call from my mother and told me that he had been killed. And he was killed, he was taking off from the runway, and his motor in his plane conked out, and he went into a cement building and killed him. After all of that, being captured and what, with the help of the underground, getting back to the American lines, and he got killed. So his name was Lincoln Sherwood. That was a great person. But his dad came home, and there's a tragedy to that too. He came home and he bought some land to farm down by Yuma, Arizona. And there was a big new government development down there for soldiers after the war. And there's three couples, 6 people in a car, coming home from there, and engineering in a train was going through a crossing without, he'd been drinking as an engineer of a train. He'd been drinking, and he didn't didn't have the lights on the train, and the crossing guard thing wasn't down. And so as they started to cross this was at the edge of Phoenix, and they started to cross, the train hit them and killed all 6 of them. So that was, and one of Gleason was married to my first cousin too. So it's all kind of tied together. It's kind of a thing. But as I said, I don't consider myself any kind of a war hero. I wore this jacket. This is a flight jacket that you wear